Welcome back to another episode of Journey to Life with me, ArletteJones-Lawson, and my daughter and co-host, Constance Fields. Our topic today will focus on the complex healing process of grief. We are honored today with our special guest, Alexia Ford.
Yes, Alexia, we're so glad that you're here. Alexia Ford is an LMSW, and she obtained a master in Divinity in 2018. She completed a year-long internship as a hospital chaplain and is currently employed as a hospice chaplain since 2020. She is no stranger to helping individuals and families with processing death, dying, and bereavement. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking me and involving me. This is such a topic that I think that is not discussed often enough. So I am just so glad that you all thought to bring this topic up for discussion. And thank you for including me.
Well, welcome. And we are so honored to have you a part of this discussion. It is such an important discussion to have. And we just feel like it's going to help so many people.
Then, when we talk about the 5 stages, like was mentioned earlier, there are also now 7 stages that have been introduced. Mm-hmm. And I like these 7 stages. I'm going to list them. I almost like them more than I do the 5 stages when it comes to discussing grief, because I feel like it's more an accurate depiction of how we actually process through. So the first one is shock and denial, and then pain and guilt. The third is anger and bargaining. The 4th is depression. The 5th is the upward turn. 6 is reconstruction and reconstruction. Number 6 is reconstruction and working through. And then there's acceptance and hope. So, there's the shock and denial is just like what we've discussed, the denial, the state of belief, the numb feelings. And then with the pain and the guilt, it's similar to what we discussed with, I believe, the anger stage, that guilt that comes in. And with this, though, you may be feeling like you're making people's lives harder because of the feelings that you're still experiencing and the needs that you have. I don't know if you want to discuss that a little more in depth, but I know that there are times where people feel like, I can't talk to so-and-so anymore about this feeling of grief I have because I feel guilty that I'm still experiencing it. For a personal standpoint, when I was diagnosed with colon cancer, I had stage 1, I had surgery. I didn't have to have any chemo, didn't have to have any other treatments, but I wasn't over it and I still wanted to talk about it. And I felt guilty for still being in that state of how this actually happened to me and this impacted me in a certain way, and feeling guilty for wanting to talk to people or feeling like I was putting that on other people because, well, you only had stage 1 cancer, they cut it out, like you're cancer free now, but I still was experiencing a lot of the stages when it comes to that. I'd have moments where I would feel guilty, survivor's guilt, for having friends who had stage 4 cancer and died. And why do I get to live? And I wanted to process that with people, but I felt like I couldn't. So that applies to me personally with that stage.
I feel like, I feel like whenever someone has cancer that invades their body, I don't care what stage it is, I feel like you have a right to feel whatever you feel forever, how long you feel.
Absolutely.
And the fact that you're one of the fortunate ones that it was stage 1 doesn't mean that it didn't invade your body. It doesn't mean that the fear that it did and it could isn't there and won't always be there. And you don't have a right to talk about it as often as you want. You can be 100 years old and talking about it, to your great grandkids. You know what I mean? I remember back when I was in my 30s. I mean, you talk about it as often as you want to. It's your experience and you have a right to talk about it, and there should be no guilt surrounding it. And because somebody is tired of hearing about it, that's their problem. Tell it to whoever, tell it as often as you want to. It's your story, it's your experience, and you have a right to talk about it. And I think that when thoughts of guilt for something like that comes on you, I think it's like one of those things where you need to hit the delete button. And delete that kind of guilt, because that's not yours. That belongs someplace else. I think that when it comes to grief and guilt, I think that a lot of times people will oftentimes feel guilt when it's a situation like this young kid who was shot going to pick up his twin siblings. His parents might feel guilt for sending him instead of them, or his siblings might feel guilt for their brother coming to pick them up. You know what I mean? I think that guilt manifests itself in a lot of different ways.
Definitely.
And with regards to Alexia and dealing with hospice and and the whole the whole loved ones saying I should have stressed harder for them to stop smoking. I wouldn't bought them the cigarettes. I shouldn't have done that. If I had put my foot down more firmly, they wouldn't have done that. Or even with alcoholics, if I hadn't gone out and bought them the alcohol, if I had swapped out water for the alcohol in the bottles more often, then they wouldn't have gotten cirrhosis of the liver and died. I mean, it's a whole lot of reasons for us to experience the guilt. And that's one of those feelings that I think is going to always manifest. And I'm with Constance. I think these 7 stages of grief are a little more detailed.
Right, absolutely. Nobody knows or experiences what you feel, and I love the way Arletta put it, as far as, this is your story. Nobody knows how you feel. That was scary, I'm guessing, and very traumatic, for you. And that's the way you felt. And so you continue to honor your story and your feelings, and find that your tribe of people who will support you in wanting to hear and be encouraging of you and your story, and who will continue to support you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I hope that, I hope your guilt subsides, because I know that that's something that you're dealing with. But I hope it does subside, and that you see it, reframe, using your mom's words, reframe it as, I am fortunate. I can tell other people, how I made it through, how I got over this, even though and not minimize it, because this was a big deal. This was a big deal. This happened to you. This is real.
And give other people who may also be battling that type of guilt permission to to speak about it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, thank you both for that confirmation. All right.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm sure that helps whoever's listening and watching as well. So
Yeah.
if we keep going with this, a lot of these definitely, at least these last two, definitely coincide with the 5 stages, with the anger and bargaining as number 3, and then number 4 being depression. So we talked a bit about that already, but diving into it a little bit more, the anger and the bargaining, like was mentioned earlier, is where you're lashing out. You're telling God or your higher power that you'll do anything they ask if they'll only grant you relief from the feelings or the situation. And then with the depression, it can be a period of isolation and loneliness, where you're reflecting on that loss. So we spent a good amount of time diving into that, but I just wanted to point out how similar it is to the 5 stages. But the last 3 definitely are more, or excuse me, the next 2 are definitely newer concepts when we think about processing. But I think that this really more accurately depicts how we process grief as humans. So you have the upward turn. And at this point, the stages of grief, like anger and pain, have started to die down. They started to calm down, and you're left more calm and relaxed. It's not necessarily acceptance, but you're not at this heightened state of anxiety and all of these balls of emotion that are possibly consuming you. And then the upward turn, oh no, I'm sorry, and then reconstruction and working through, you can begin to start putting the pieces of your life back together and moving forward. What are your thoughts on those 2 newer concepts?
Well, I feel as though I like this group or this method or model of stages of grief as well, because it is more detailed. There are aspects where our grief does turn, that the acceptance kicks in. You've accepted, it's nothing that you can do differently. And, you're ready to move forward. And it has to be that person that's going to be wanting to be ready to move into this space of an upward turn. The reconstruction and working through, beginning to put back pieces together of their lives to, bring it back to as normal as what it used to be. It's definitely a part of how we get through the death of a loved one. It's going through this. This is very practical. Very practical.
It is very practical.
I think it's and I think the thing to keep in mind with these 2 stages is that a person going through this can feel a little uncomfortable with this and not entitled to feel these feelings. Because I know I've had people in my life that have, laughed for the first time and have felt guilty because they've laughed for the first time and then went right back up to depression. Up right back up to anger. And been like, "Ooh, no, I'm not ready for that." So it can feel a little uncomfortable. And so I'm not sure that, when people see a person going into this calm and relaxed state and looking like they're moving forward, like they're ready and can accept it when they move back up into a depression or when they move back up into an anger. It's like, wait a minute, no, I'm not ready for you to go back to depression. I'm not ready for you to go backwards. You're backtracking. I'm not ready for that. Not recognizing that, when you're moving forward and you're going into this upward turn, it's not a familiar place to you anymore. And you got to ease into it. You got to get comfortable again with laughter. You got to get comfortable not feeling guilty about, feeling happiness, or, and happiness isn't going to feel the same as it used to be. You used to feel happiness with this person in your life. Now you got to feel happiness in a different way, because now happiness is going to be happiness with the absence of this person. So it's a different type of happiness. And so now you're used to happiness minus this person, or minus these people. And so you got to get used to it. And so you might be in an upward turn, and you might be ready to move forward, but before you live in that place, you got to visit that place maybe. You visit that place and you leave that place, and you visit that place and you leave that place, and then before you move in to that place. So
that's a beautiful analogy. I like the way you put that. I couldn't have said it better. Very nice.
And then that leads us to acceptance and hope. That is the rounding out of those stages. But yeah, like you said, the moving in and out of like, if you were remarrying, or dating, let's say you lost a partner and then you start dating again. And it's like, just because you look like you've moved on doesn't mean that at night you're not feeling, or you're not feeling, sadness, or all of these other earlier stages. So now we have some questions that we're gonna just dive into. It'll be panel, it'll be Alexia, so we'll just dive into that.
Panel, how do we think that we as a society became to rely so heavily on the stages of grief? I know Constance was saying that these stages were never intended to be utilized in a way that, we as a society utilize them, because we utilize them for all grief, not just terminal illnesses, but all grief.
Right. I think one of the reasons why is because we want an answer. And I think the stages kind of help provide an answer, if not a story, or if not some rationale as to the why, the why things happen. I think the stages of grief help us to cope, or lead us to filling in the blank of what we're looking for at that stage. I think that's what they help us to do.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say, I think somebody read a book that Kubler-Ross wrote and said, girl, apply this to you, because this sounds like what you need. And then we just kept going. So, but you said it, the way you said it makes a lot, of sense.
Definitely.
I think we rely so heavily on how-to books. On instructions and directions. And it's like, I don't know, somebody tell me.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, at what point do you think somebody should seek therapy, Alexia?
I think I always think about in the movie, in one of Tyler Perry's movies, Meet the Browns, where Jennifer Lewis's character at the funeral was going to go into the coffin after her loved one. And when you get to the point where you feel like you have to dive in the coffin, at the funeral after your loved one, you need to seek therapy.
Right.
But in all seriousness, I think when when things are starting to get complicated, when you are so far to where you're not able to maintain a healthy lifestyle, then I think that that's when therapy should come into place. When unhealthy coping mechanisms such as turning to drugs, alcohol, addictions, when those things come into play, even if it's just for a short term of therapy, just being able to just have somebody to talk to. A lot of times I find when people have enmeshed relationships with the person that passed on, who died, or if they have a lot of guilt or shame from that, then they may need to come and speak to someone. But I think that they should definitely seek therapy when things become unhealthy. When you're starting to have a long length of symptoms of depression, then you need to kind of come in and talk to someone. When you're experiencing, and those are being unable to eat, having no appetite, or eating all the time, the extremes. When you are up all night and unable to sleep, or constantly worrying, when you are just having a difficult time, and no longer want to live because this person is no longer living. When thoughts of suicide happen, or are you contemplating, or even just thinking about, then it's definitely time for you to kind of seek therapy and have to help get someone else from the outside to help you process that grief. Definitely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to point out that is not a sign of weakness, that's an absolute sign of strength, is to recognize that there's a need. And I'm so happy that that in today's society that emphasis is being placed on mental health, and and that there's such a positivity in reaching out and saying, I need help.
Absolutely.
And I know that we talked about some of the steps towards processing grief in a healthy manner. Was there any other ways of processing grief in a healthy manner that you wanted to point out, Alexia?
I think just to kind of review it again, I think it's important that you take time to grieve. Don't be in a hurry. It's important to honor those feelings of grief. Don't overcommit yourself, where you're trying to avoid those feelings of sadness and hurt. Because a lot of times all it's going to do is it's going to delay it, because it's going to come out. It's definitely going to come out. It might not be immediately, but it's going to come out. I've seen delayed grief happen a lot, and it's because it can be. I don't know. I don't want to say that it's the absolute reason, but delayed grief does happen when people don't take the time to grieve. And that simply means that it'll come out years later, watching a movie, and you're trying to figure out, why am I crying so much, at it, about this movie? And it's from delayed grief. Let's see, definitely have a tribe, a group of people, a support system, someone you can talk to, someone you can trust. And if not, if you don't have that, definitely there are support groups. I mean, it's no excuse. We have a lot of resources in the communities that are available to help. So just ask for help. And for friends And loved ones who see someone going through grief, don't be afraid to be with them, to I think Arlette said earlier, to just be in that space with them. Be creative, be supportive of that person. Help them to go through what they're going through.
Thank you for like that. Did you have a favorite technique as a therapist that you use with clients?
I think one of the techniques that I would say that I enjoy most would be the honoring of the memory of a person. Sharing memories, sharing photographs, good times, try to put things on a positive note. Identifying attributes of loved ones that you see in your relatives, that remind you of that person who has passed. So it's definitely about, and one of the things that I really, if people are writers in journal, I strongly advise that you write in journal your feelings. Yeah, I think that is so helpful. And just other little activities, that, special things that you can do. Especially if the person that you're grieving was one who went fishing, and that was a favorite pastime, then, center or create a moment around that to where you can recreate a fishing moment. And also, utilize that time to start a new tradition, with another loved one or someone from a younger generation, and start a new tradition. So those are just a few things.
Love those.
My cousin recently got a tattoo in honor of her mom, which I thought was really special. And I've heard a lot of people doing that, getting a tattoo in honor of their loved one that's passed.
I think that we can do to honor and cherish the person that we lost. If not every year on their birthday or during special holidays, to not forget, but to remember. And whether it be to, place flowers on graves, or to plant a tree in memory of that person, to do something special. It's a number of things that we can do to honor that person. Yeah.
I know one thing that Constance has started doing, which I appreciate, is she started making my mom's pound cake recipe. With, it always puts me, in the memory of my mom, because it's the only, when my mom wasn't much of a cook, and there was only a few things that she made that made very, very well. In pound cake, I don't think I've ever tasted a pound cake as good as my mom. And makes it perfectly. And whenever I taste it, it's like, ooh.
Yeah, it brings back memories.
Yeah.
And that's one of those attributes, it's always someone in the family that reminds you of that loved one. It's something that they say or do, or maybe actions that take place. And you what you just said reminded me of grandma. It's and be okay with saying it and sharing it, and living in that space of it, that moment of, wow, you reminded me of that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of acceptance is when you can talk about that person, and and it generates these positive memories, and where you can share memories of that person, and it can generate good thoughts. I wanted to bring up one last thing, and that is uncomplicated grief versus complicated grief, which is terms that I hadn't been introduced to until now. So I'm going to briefly talk about uncomplicated grief first. So uncomplicated grief is what's considered normal grief.
Mm-hmm.
So uncomplicated grief suggests that a person is processing their grief or feelings in a way that's typical or culturally expected. Grief is a necessary part of going through a painful or traumatic loss. And while grief differs for everyone, most people have common experiences and emotions in the days, weeks, or months following a major loss. And this is referred to as normal grief. So what do you all think about, normal or uncomplicated grief?
I mean, I think the uncomplicated grief is a space that you expect to be in. It's what we know as grief and the experience and the process of loss. I think talking about complicated grief is the one that people are not so much aware of. And the people outside of the mental health world would not know just right off the bat, oh, you're experiencing complicated grief, or you're experiencing uncomplicated grief. That's not something that's in our natural vocabulary.
Right.
But, I think what I love about what we're talking about today is that, it gives some insight to people who may be experiencing grief in some capacity, or maybe know someone who is experiencing grief in some capacity, and it gives some insight into, oh, this is normal. What you're experiencing is normal. And so I think that can be the difference. When it comes to complicated grief, though, if you don't mind, I'll read this. This can be diagnosed if symptoms persist for 12 months. If you're a child, it'd be 6 months, or adolescents, after the loss of a close loved one. And people can refer to complicated grief in many different ways. And that includes chronic grief, atypical grief, exaggerated grief, pathological grief, and persistent complex bereavement disorder. Whatever the name of the condition actually infers that there's an abnormal delay in the process, or an absence of the ability to cope with that grief, and it causes distress. So I think that's more of what society maybe doesn't understand. It's more complex. It's where you actually need help, like professional help.
Exactly. And I guess, for instance, if someone is carrying around an urn with them to work, to school, to the grocery store, everywhere they go, then that's a little bit much,
right?
When things are just kind of out of the ordinary. I think what you said was that the normal grief, when it's to the extreme of the normal grief, when things just are not are just a little bit off, is when there is a need for concern. And
I want to add too, I know I mentioned this earlier about different cultures, but there are cultures that have altars for their ancestors. And somebody of not that culture, you may be like, oh, are you experiencing complicated grief? No, this is how they choose to honor. This is that the technique that you mentioned of having a ceremony of some sort, or having setting up something to remember them.
Right.
I think that what perhaps would maybe fall into that category if you had an altar type of thing set up, as if you were like praying at the altar like all the time, and you know it was consuming you and all of these things like that. I think that would be probably where that complicated grief would come from, but that's something that a professional maybe would need to diagnose.
Yes, I
Right.
agree.
And it
Okay.
said where it persisted for 12 months or more.
Right.
Mhm.
I think that's, where the grief was like fresh, where it
Mhm.
seemed like it was fresh, like it had just happened 12
Yeah.
months from now.
Yeah, which can co-occur with like PTSD.
Mhm.
Sure,
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah.
Well,
Wow.
thank you all so much for this discussion. Did any of you have any words that you wanted to share about this experience, or what you hope that the audience takes away from this podcast?
Wow. I'm just honored that you all have asked me to be on this panel. I am grateful. I think that this is definitely a topic that needs to be discussed more. I think that we have been socialized to grieve certain ways. I think that the media plays a huge part in what we see death as, with horror films and, these psychological thrillers that have come out recently, and how we really see death. But death is really very mysterious. It always has been. It's just like birth is.
Mhm.
There's this space of the unknown, and I think that the fear of death and dying comes in the unknown, and in that space of the unknown. But there's more to talk about, and so I'm just grateful that you all have put it out there and have started conversations. So hopefully this conversation won't stop with whoever is out there listening, and that they will continue to ask the questions and to be curious about grief and about this subject. So I just really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes, our pleasure. And it's important for anyone that's listening to know that, that your grieving process, there's no timetable on it. You grieve at your own pace. And there's no hierarchy to your grief, and don't compare your grief to anybody else's grief. And you're entitled to grieve in whatever manner and for whatever reason that you grieve.
Mhm.
And just know that there's a community out there, that there's resources out there for you to help you through whatever processes you need to go through. And we hope that you utilize that, and there'll be resources attached to this podcast as always.
Thank you all so much for this important conversation. And we hope that whoever's listening, whoever's watching, that you take something from this and can apply it to yourself, or share it with somebody in your life who may be experiencing grief or loss in whatever capacity, however you feel like it can help them. Thank you so much, and be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank
Until
you.
next time.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.